The Aurora, the Jelly Shroom Cave, the Bone Field. This video is not about any of these places, because while Subnautica is full of iconic locations the whole player base knows and loves, it also has some amazing places that are pretty obscure. Subnautica is fundamentally a game of exploration, and it has some surprises for explorers willing to go the extra mile. The locations we'll be counting down in this video are all completely optional, even for a 100% playthrough, but they all have their own ways of rewarding a player who visits them, sometimes with resources, but sometimes just because they're beautiful, mysterious, or simply really cool. So come along as we explore these obscure locations. I hope you find that they're the coolest places you've never seen. We begin below the underwater islands. Uraninite is not exactly the most sought-after resource in this game. While you need it to craft nuclear fuel, the fuel rods it makes last 19.2 bajillion years, so it's not like you need to replace them frequently. And the only other use for uraninite is the occasional really bad pun. But if, for some strange reason, you really want to get loads and loads of uraninite, then grab your drill arm and head to the underwater islands. Not to the islands themselves, but instead, way down beneath them, where you'll find our first location. The seafloor below is deep. In fact, this is the deepest biome in the crater that doesn't have an entrance to the Lost River. Not much sunlight penetrates this far underwater, so it's always a little dark down here. The ground is fairly jagged and uneven, and there's tons of bone sharks, which doesn't exactly give a welcoming first impression. This area has no plant life whatsoever and is peppered with thermal vents. No other location does such a great job of reminding you are in a volcanic crater. Well, at least until you're inside the actual volcano. You can also find occasional fragments down here, like propulsion cannons and stasis rifles. Get out of here, you. There's not much danger of actually getting killed, but the large bone shark population keeps you on your toes, and combined with the presence of weapons and volcanic activity, it gives the whole place a vibe of quiet menace. And, just as promised, there's tons and tons of drillable uraninite. There's also the occasional nodes of gold and silver down here if you're looking for something actually useful. This place is pretty cool, but now we're moving on all the way to the other side of the map, to the edge of the crash zone. The crash zone is mostly known for two things: the enormous wreck of the Aurora and the Reaper Leviathans that patrol around it. But if you head to its southeastern corner, you'll find an area that's surprisingly lush. These are the crash zone mesas, tall plateaus covered in green grass and the type of flora and fauna you'd expect to find in the safe shallows. Here you'll find peepers, hoverfish, brain coral, gasopods, boomerangs, even table coral. Sure, there's the occasional bone shark, but with no crash fish, this may be an even better place for a main base than— oh, look out! Where did that come from? Oh! Right, we are still in the crash zone, and these mesas are not some kind of magic sanctuary from the Reapers. Wandering around this place with its tall green grass that you can't really find anywhere else makes me wonder, are these few mesas the remnants of what was once a much larger biome? Did this flora once cover the entirety of what is now the crash zone before the impact of the Aurora? What if— hey, knock it off, I'm trying to make a video here. What if the mesas weren't originally mesas at all? Maybe they're all that's left after the shockwave of the Aurora crash smashed through the rest of the ground. It would explain why they're the only part of the crash zone that isn't covered in sand. It paints a tragic picture of the effect of the Aurora. What once was a lush, thriving ecosystem full of flora and small fish was ripped away, leaving behind a deep, sandy trench, deep enough for the Reapers to move in from the nearby mountains. Perhaps these last remnants will flourish and repopulate their home, or perhaps the damage was too great, and this biome will belong to the Leviathans forevermore. Apparently Reapers bury themselves in the sand now to wait in ambush. That's a terrifying thought. And speaking of Reapers, I'd like to call out an honorable mention in the dunes. Just to the northeast of the largest dune's wreck, you'll find a sandy ridge with a curious-looking opening. This passage is one of the dune's tunnels and will take you to the very western edge of the biome. This one is small, and the only color is some orange and purple flora growing on the walls, but it's still an interesting find considering most of this area is vast featureless sand. Just gonna get that fixed up. There's a second tunnel a little to the north. You can see this one's exit is right by the entrance, so it's a little more of a hiding spot than a tunnel. Sure, this tube is very small, but it has some color in the flora and glowing rock grubs inside. There's also shuttle bugs and cave crawlers, sometimes resource nodes. It's a nice place to hang out and hide if you're being chased by a reaper. Just be careful where you park your Seamoth. This is a bad neighborhood. Well, there goes my ride. Let's move on from the northwest corner of the map to the southwest. The Sea Treader's path snakes its way along the southwestern edge of the map. This is the route taken by the Sea Treader Leviathans as they march along, leaving behind resources of varying quality. But towards the westernmost part of this path, it actually goes underground through a gigantic tunnel system. The entrance is marked with a variety of deepwater flora, including deep shrooms, an important late-game crafting ingredient. The tunnel travels all the way north, past the Bloodkelp Trench, exiting just below the dunes, and you can pass by the Sea Treaders as they travel through it. How's the commute today, fellas? I'm sure that means it's going fine. This cave is pretty safe, and the way it's lit by the bioluminescent flora gives it a very calming, peaceful feeling. But this cave system is much more than just the central tunnel used by the Sea Treaders. It expands outward and upward through a network of smaller and smaller tunnels that twist their way through the rock below the sea floor. The designers really went all out here, filling these caverns with bridges, outcroppings, and plateaus, and having tunnels come off in every conceivable direction. They really took advantage of the three-dimensional nature of this game's exploration. If you work your way carefully through these narrow tunnels, you can eventually find yourself coming out a back entrance to these caves in the shallower part of the Sea Treader's Path biome near the giant wreck. But if you don't have a vehicle, be careful. The tunnels can be confusing with numerous circle backs and dead ends. And if you get lost without enough oxygen, well, welcome to Subnautica. We now move from the southwest to, well, I'm guessing you can read. The mushroom forests, a brilliantly crafted fictional ecosystem. There are two mushroom forest biomes, one in the northwest and one in the northeast. But the one in the northeast has a bigger cave system underneath the largest mushroom tree. You might know that you can find one of the game's 5 cuttlefish eggs inside. What you might not know is that the cuttlefish egg is not at the bottom of the cave. It keeps going down. Go through the right opening and you can follow the tunnels as they twist and turn to the east. You can't fit a vehicle down here, but if you're running low on oxygen, you can find the occasional brain coral. Diving deeper, the entire aesthetic of the tunnel will suddenly change, the walls becoming dark volcanic rock and a massive thermal vent appearing in the center of a cave. Take the right tunnel out of this room and the aesthetic changes yet again, in which the walls are still dark but have a softer texture. It is so easy to get lost in these caves. The tunnels twist and turn so closely together that even the 3D map on the Sea Glide is hard to read. And every step of the way, there are forking tunnels that lead to dead ends or twist back around to where they started, always leaving you unsure if you'll get to the next brain coral before you run out of oxygen. And once you've come back to the same brain coral for the 10th time, you start wondering how long your water supplies will last. It all adds up to give these tunnels a feeling of frantic claustrophobia. Once you do finally find the right tunnel, you will pass by mesmers and mesmer eggs, finally emerging in a cave that opens into the bulb zone. Working your way through this underground northeast passage can be a little stressful, but the stunning visuals you get from the varying palettes and environments are worth it. And you know what's cool? You could discover this in the complete opposite order. Investigating a small opening behind the mesmer nesting grounds in the bulb zone, you can work your way through the various tunnels until you finally come to the caves of the mushroom forest, and your efforts are rewarded with a cuttlefish egg. Next up, we have some caves in the grassy plateaus, but not the ones everyone thinks of. Every Subnautica veteran knows that the grassy plateaus contain entrances to the beautiful and dangerous Jelly Shroom Caves. But did you know there are entrances to other large cave systems in that same biome? Like this one in the southeast. This layered, sinkhole-like formation connects to a tunnel chock full of quartz, limestone, and sandstone, with the added benefit that there's no pink snakes trying to chew your face off. Exploring it with a flashlight will help you find the resources, but there's actually so much bioluminescence in here the view looks a lot better if you turn it off. The purple glow, together with occasional bits of orange, green, and blue, gives the whole tunnel a relaxed ambiance while still feeling distinctly alien. Now, the rarest resource node in Subnautica is the purple pinecone, and this tunnel doesn't actually have any. But these decorative corals look pretty similar, right? They had me going for a second. Here's an entrance to another one of these caves, near LifePod 6. The entrance here opens into a huge cavern, which has the same aesthetic and resources as the tunnel. But this one really does have a rarity: sea crowns, probably the hardest to find flora that actually has a use. Between the beauty and the utility, these grassy plateaus caves are some of my favorite in the game, despite being so easy to miss. Man, I could stay down here for hours, if it wouldn't cause me to drown horribly. For our final location, we're heading back to the underwater islands. The entire region of the underwater islands is kind of obscure. Even in a 100% run, there's nothing you need in the entire biome. Its most prominent feature is probably the giant wreck precariously balanced between two of the islands. But just past that wreck, you'll find another floating island with something peculiar: a thermal vent. Thermal vents normally form due to underground volcanic activity, but the underwater islands have been lifted above the sea floor, so how can there be a volcano here? Well, if you search for where this heat is coming from, you'll find an entrance that takes you into a cave inside this island. This cave has a completely unique feel, with outcroppings of spotted dockleaf and yellow coral plate, and cave crawlers moving up and down the narrow walls. The thin, vertical nature of these caves really lets the crawlers show off how they can go along walls as easily as the ground. Whether you use flashlight, sea glide lamp, or no light at all, this cave is gorgeous. Most prominently is a large pillar of rock running straight up and down through the middle of this cave, directly under the thermal vent. The hot water must be coming up through this narrow tube. There are numerous small exits leading out and below the island where you can continue to investigate this mysterious volcanic activity. And if you travel all the way down to the bottom, you'll find that this floating island has a tether, a thin tube of rock connecting it to the sea floor, allowing the heat to flow upward, making this island a unique sort of floating volcano. Swimming up the side of this island is a pretty sight too, with dozens of small island fragments that seem to be floating despite having no floaters attached to them. Perhaps a mystery for another day. The way this island and its cave sort of tells a story of an unfolding mystery is why it takes the #1 spot in my mind. Thanks for coming along as we explored some of Subnautica's more out-of-the-way spots. Oh, come on, knock it off, will you? Man, bone sharks are annoying. Anyway, the existence of all these obscure locations really shows how Subnautica goes the distance to create a fully populated world, and reward the players who are willing to explore just for exploration's sake. So what did you think of our little Subnautica Easter egg hunt? How many of these places did you already know about? Any you think I missed? What's your favorite obscure place in the game? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching the coolest Subnautica locations you've never seen.